On Storytelling and Beyond, we bring you tales that touch the soul, and this one is no different. Olivia sat in the dimly lit corner of her tiny apartment, the weight of exhaustion pressing down on her shoulders like an anchor dragging her into the depths of an ocean she had no strength to swim in. The flickering bulb overhead cast long shadows on the peeling walls, each crack and stain a reflection of the turmoil inside her. She clutched a crumpled piece of paper in her trembling hands, a final notice from her landlord. Her eyes, red and swollen from endless nights of silent weeping, drifted toward the pile of unopened bills stacked on the rickety wooden table. Credit cards maxed out. Bank account nearly empty. The reality was suffocating. The silence of the apartment was deafening, broken only by the faint ticking of the clock on the wall, each second a cruel reminder of time slipping away, of opportunities lost, of a future that seemed to be unraveling before her eyes. Her fingers brushed against the cold metal of her wedding ring, the only thing she hadn't pawned yet. It sat abandoned on the table, stripped of its meaning, nothing more than a relic of a life that once was. A life where she had felt loved. A life where she had believed in forever. But forever had come crashing down the moment she had walked into her own home one evening and found it emptier than her own heart. No note. No explanation. Just an absence so sharp it had cut through her soul. Her husband, the man she had built a life with, had left without a word. Days later, the truth had come like a slap. He had drained their joint bank account and moved in with someone else. Someone younger. Someone better? The word haunted her. Was she not enough? Had she become so unlovable that the man who had once vowed to stand beside her through everything had chosen to vanish instead? A deep, burning anger stirred within her chest, an emotion she had tried to suppress. How could he do this? After everything she had sacrificed, everything she had given? The countless nights she had stayed up waiting for him, the time she had put his dreams before her own. And now, she was left with nothing but an echo of a love that had never really been hers to keep. She clenched her jaw, biting back the sob that threatened to escape. Hatred and love waged war within her, battling for control of the space he had abandoned. She hated him for what he had done, but she hated herself more for still missing him. For still longing for the warmth of arms that had so easily let her go. The loud growl of her stomach pulled her back to the present, to the cruel reality of survival. She hadn't eaten all day. A half-eaten sandwich from yesterday sat on the counter, but she hesitated. If she finished it now, what would she have for later? The question hung in the air, heavier than the grief in her chest. Pushing herself up from the couch, she moved to the laptop sitting on the old, chipped coffee table. The screen lit up, illuminating her tired face as she scrolled through endless job listings. A dozen rejections already filled her inbox, each one another nail in the coffin of her self-worth. She had once been confident, accomplished. But now? Now, she was just another name in the sea of applicants. Another unemployed, desperate woman fighting for a chance to breathe again. Her vision blurred as she clicked through postings, her fingers numb against the keys. And then, she saw it. Administrative assistant needed, immediate hiring. Her pulse quickened. It wasn't her dream job. It wasn't even close. But it was a paycheck. A chance to stay afloat for just a little longer. She hesitated for only a second before clicking apply. As the message sent, a tear rolled down her cheek. She didn't know it yet, but this wasn't just an application. This was the beginning of something she could never have imagined. The morning sun cast a dull glow through the worn-out curtains of Olivia's tiny apartment, but it did little to lift the weight crushing her chest. Sleep had been elusive, stolen by relentless thoughts of failure, of loneliness, of an uncertain future she felt powerless to control. She sat at the small, rickety table, staring blankly at the cracked screen of her phone. No new messages. No callbacks. No hope. A silent war raged inside her, one side whispering that maybe she was meant to fade into nothing, the other clinging to the fragile thread of survival. And then, the phone vibrated. The sound jolted her from her haze, her breath catching in her throat as she hesitated before picking it up. An unknown number. For a moment, fear wrapped around her like a vice. Was this another debt collector? Another reminder of how far she had fallen? But then she remembered she had sent out job applications. Could this be? Swallowing hard, she answered. Hello? Her voice came out weaker than she intended, betraying the exhaustion beneath her carefully constructed composure. Good morning, is this Olivia Carter? A deep male voice, professional yet firm, filled the silence. Yes, speaking. Her fingers tightened around the phone. My name is Mr. Reynolds. I'm calling from Ashwood Enterprises regarding the administrative assistant position you applied for. Would you be available for an interview this afternoon? The words didn't immediately register. She blinked, her mind scrambling to make sense of them. Was she hearing this right? An interview? Today? The weight on her chest shifted slightly, replaced by something unfamiliar. Hope. Yes. Yes, I'm available, she answered, perhaps a little too quickly. Great. We'll see you at 2 p.m. at our downtown office. You'll receive an email with the details shortly. Have a good day, Miss Carter. The call ended before she could thank him, but it didn't matter. She sat there, phone still in hand, staring at the screen as if it might disappear at any moment. A chance. She had a chance. But the moment the excitement began to take hold, doubt slithered in. Would they see through her? Would they notice how broken she was? Would they ask why someone like her, once thriving, was now desperately grasping for a low-level job just to keep from drowning? Shoving those thoughts aside, she sprang into action. She threw open her tiny closet, rifling through the few professional outfits she had left, most of them outdated, some too tight, others too loose. She finally settled on a simple navy blouse and black slacks, running her hands over the fabric to smooth out the wrinkles. It wasn't perfect, but it would have to do. With shaky hands, she applied light makeup, trying to erase the evidence of sleepless nights. As she stared at her reflection in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman looking back at her. Gone was the bright, confident Olivia who once laughed easily, who believed in love, in security, in forever. In her place stood someone weathered, wounded. A woman who had been abandoned, stripped of everything she once was. And yet, here she was. Still fighting. By the time she stepped out of the apartment, the city's afternoon air hit her like a wave. She clutched her purse, her knuckles white, and made her way to the bus stop. With every step, her heart pounded louder. This interview wasn't just about a job. It was about proving to herself more than anyone else that she wasn't finished. That she was still standing. As the bus doors closed behind her, she exhaled slowly, trying to steady the storm inside. She had no idea that what awaited her at that interview was not just an opportunity, but a revelation that would change everything. The glass doors of Ashwood Enterprises loomed ahead, their polished surface reflecting a version of Olivia she hardly recognized. She stood there for a moment, adjusting her blouse, smoothing down invisible wrinkles with trembling hands. Her heart pounded in her chest like a drum, each beat a reminder of how much was at stake. This wasn't just an interview. It was a battle against the past, against the voices in her head that whispered she wasn't good enough, that she had already lost everything worth fighting for. She inhaled sharply and stepped inside. The lobby was pristine, the air thick with the scent of polished wood and expensive cologne. High ceilings, sleek furniture, the quiet hum of people moving with purpose. It was a world she once belonged to, but now felt foreign, almost unreachable. As she approached the reception desk, she straightened her posture, trying to summon whatever remained of the confident woman she used to be. Olivia Carter, here for a 2 p.m. interview, she said, her voice measured but firm. The receptionist, a young woman with perfectly styled hair and an effortless smile, glanced at her computer screen before nodding. Welcome, Ms. Carter. Please take a seat. Mr. Reynolds will be with you shortly. Olivia offered a tight smile in return and moved toward the waiting area. Her fingers played nervously with the strap of her purse as she sat down. She could feel the weight of her past pressing against her shoulders, the ghosts of memories creeping in, the day she left her marriage with nothing but a suitcase, the nights she spent curled up on a borrowed couch, the mornings she stared at job rejection emails until the words blurred together. She was so lost in thought that she didn't notice the man walking toward her until he spoke. Ms. Carter? She looked up sharply, her pulse jumping. A tall, well-dressed man in his early 50s stood before her, his expression unreadable. There was something in his eyes, something that made her stomach twist in an inexplicable way. "Yes," she managed, rising to her feet. "I'm Daniel Reynolds, head of HR. Please, follow me." She nodded, falling into step beside him as they moved down a sleek corridor. Her mind raced, trying to recall everything she had rehearsed. Keep eye contact. Speak with confidence. Don't let them see the cracks. The office they entered was minimalistic but elegant. A large window stretched across one wall, offering a breathtaking view of the city below. Olivia sat as directed, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her breath steady but shallow. Mr. Reynolds settled across from her, scanning a document on his desk before finally lifting his gaze. For a brief moment, there was silence, thick, heavy, charged with something she couldn't quite name. And then, he spoke. "Before we begin, Olivia, I want to ask you something." His voice was calm, but there was an underlying intensity she couldn't ignore. She swallowed. "Of course." His eyes searched hers, his next words slicing through the air like a blade. "Do you remember me?" Her breath hitched. Confusion flickered across her face, followed by a slow, creeping unease. She studied his features, trying to place them, but the harder she searched, the more elusive the answer became. I don't think so," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. A faint, knowing smile ghosted across his lips. But it wasn't a friendly smile. It was something else. Something unsettling. "That's interesting," he murmured, leaning back in his chair. "Because I remember you, Olivia. Very well." Her stomach turned to ice. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. And in that moment, as she sat frozen in the chair, she realized this wasn't just an interview. This was something else entirely. Something she never saw coming. The air in the office felt heavier now, thick with an unspoken tension that wrapped itself around Olivia like a suffocating veil. Her pulse quickened, an uneasy prickle running down her spine. She swallowed hard, trying to steady herself, but the intensity in Daniel Reynolds' gaze made it impossible. His words echoed in her mind, looping like a haunting melody because I remember you, Olivia. Very well. Asterisk. She forced a nervous laugh, hoping to shatter the weight of the moment. "I'm sorry, but I don't think we've met before," she said, her voice careful, measured. "Are you sure you're not mistaking me for someone else?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he leaned forward, lacing his fingers together on the desk, his piercing eyes never leaving hers. "I never forget a face," he said softly. "And I certainly wouldn't forget yours." The way he said it sent a chill through her bones. She gripped the armrest of her chair, her mind scrambling for answers. Who was this man? Why did he sound almost vindictive? Her heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears. Daniel watched her reaction closely, almost as if he was enjoying her discomfort. Then, after a long pause, he let out a quiet chuckle, shaking his head. "You don't remember, do you?" The room suddenly felt smaller, the walls closing in. I really don't," she admitted, though she hated the way her voice wavered. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Then allow me to remind you." He slid open a drawer, pulling out a single sheet of paper and placing it on the desk in front of her. Olivia hesitated before leaning forward, her breath catching the moment she saw it. Her vision blurred as she stared at the document, a termination letter from nearly a decade ago. Her name was printed at the top, but it wasn't her signature at the bottom. It was someone else's. Someone who had sealed her fate all those years ago. Her blood ran cold. No, it couldn't be. Her gaze shot back up to Daniel, a thousand unspoken questions trembling on her lips. "Now do you remember?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Memories she had buried long ago clawed their way back to the surface, a flood of pain, betrayal, and devastation. The late nights spent pouring her soul into that company. The moment she had been blindsided, fired without warning, left to pick up the shattered pieces of her career. The humiliation. The disbelief. And now, sitting in front of her, was the man responsible for it all. Daniel Reynolds wasn't just a stranger from her past. He was the one who had destroyed her. Olivia's hands curled into fists in her lap, nails biting into her skin. A storm of emotions swirled inside her: anger, bitterness, but also something else. Something darker. And then, he spoke again. "What's truly fascinating," he mused, tapping a finger against the paper, "is that life has a strange way of bringing people back together. I never thought I'd see you again, let alone have you sitting here, asking me for a job." A slow smirk crept across his lips. "And yet, here we are." The words cut through her like a blade. Olivia felt her world tilt, her breath quick and shallow. She had walked into this interview thinking it was a new beginning. A fresh start. But now, staring into the eyes of the man who had once torn everything away from her, she realized the truth. This wasn't a job interview. This was a reckoning. Silence settled between them like a thick fog, stretching unbearably long. Olivia could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning, the muted voices from outside the office walls, ordinary sounds that felt distant, almost unreal in the weight of the moment. Her entire world had shrunk down to this room, this confrontation, this man. Daniel leaned back in his chair, watching her, waiting. There was something in his eyes, a quiet satisfaction, a slow burning amusement at her unraveling. But Olivia wasn't going to let him have the final word. Not this time. She forced herself to sit taller, even though her hands trembled in her lap. "So, what now?" she asked, her voice measured, hiding the hurricane inside her. "Is this your idea of revenge? To watch me beg?" Daniel's smirk didn't waver, but something flickered in his expression, just for a second. "Revenge," he echoed, as if tasting the word. Interesting choice of words. She clenched her fists. "You destroyed my career." His brows lifted slightly, feigning innocence. "I was simply doing my job." Her stomach twisted. Those were the same words she had heard the day she was fired: cold, clinical, detached. And now, after all these years, she was sitting across from the very man who had signed her fate with a stroke of a pen. She exhaled sharply, fighting the heat rising behind her eyes. "If this is some kind of power play, congratulations. You win. I walked in here hoping for a chance, for a way to start over, but I should have known better. I should have known that people like you never change." Daniel regarded her quietly for a moment, and then, to her utter surprise, he sighed. "You really think I called you here to humiliate you?" She didn't answer. "Olivia," he said, leaning forward slightly, his voice lower now, almost thoughtful. "Tell me something. If you were sitting in my chair, and I was the one asking for a job, what would you do?" The question knocked the breath from her lungs. She hated that she hesitated. Hated that, deep down, she understood the weight of what he was asking. Because if she was in his position, if the roles were reversed, would she be able to let go of the past? Would she be able to look at the person who had wronged her and offer them a way forward? Her throat tightened. She wanted to say no. She wanted to say that she would never, ever give someone like him a second chance. But the truth sat heavy in her chest. She didn't know. Daniel must have seen the conflict in her face because his expression softened just slightly. "People change," he said simply. "You've changed. And so have I." She wanted to argue, to hold on to her anger like a shield, but the exhaustion of years of resentment weighed her down. And then, something unexpected happened. Daniel picked up the termination letter, the very symbol of her downfall, and, without breaking eye contact, he tore it in half. Then he tore it again. And again. Until the pieces fluttered onto the desk like weightless confetti. Olivia's breath hitched. "I can't change the past," he admitted, his voice steady. "But I can give you a future." For a long moment, she stared at the shredded paper, at the pieces of something that had once defined her failure. And slowly, so slowly, the grip of the past began to loosen its hold. She met his gaze, searching for deception, for a hidden agenda. But this time, she saw something else: an offer, a challenge, maybe even a small sliver of redemption. Olivia took a deep breath. The past would always be there, a scar she carried. But maybe, just maybe, it didn't have to be a chain around her ankles anymore. She extended her hand. Daniel took it. And just like that, the story shifted. From pain to possibility. From bitterness to something new. Because sometimes, the greatest revenge isn't destruction. It's moving forward. This is Storytelling and Beyond, where every twist, every heartbreak, and every second chance reminds us of the power of resilience. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more incredible journeys that touch the heart and awaken the soul.